Hello, everyone. My name is Harriet, and this is my story. So, recently I was scrolling through the depths of hell, aka TikTok, and I saw something that has changed me fundamentally as a woman, as a human.
We all had a crush on Shrek growing up, but I wanted a version of him that sounded a little something like this.
If you really want to escape, why are you so right now?
Now, this TikTok was actually made by the author of the book because I'm not too sure that anybody else would feel comfortable posting something like that on the internet. The author's name is G.M. Fairy, and for some reason I think her name is Georgia May, because no offense to all the Georgia Mays out there, but this is giving Georgia May energy, okay? And basically, Georgia May has written this book, Get in My Swamp. And this book is 200 pages of Shrek porn, of Shrek erotica. And I thought, I have to read it. Like many of you, I'm sure Shrek was my childhood. And unfortunately for me, my childhood is now completely ruined. So I had to read this. Now I'm going to make you listen to me talk about these characters and this plot, because boy, oh boy, do we have a lot to uncover. There are some weirdly intense and heavy themes in this book. I don't think they were written well enough for me to really list them all. But if you do want a list of, trigger warnings and themes, I will put them down below. But please note, it will ruin some of the best plot twists of all time. I also quickly, of course, want to pay homage and give credit to the beautiful YouTubers who invented this trend. I personally got this from the CEO of YouTube himself, Michael Microphone, but I think there are other people who did this first. Something else I want to mention is that all of these images are AI generated, and a lot of them look very funky. Like, you don't want to get too close to this man's face. With that being said, let's get into it. Our story begins with Leona. This author, G.M. Ferry, really said, I want to keep this as close to the original as possible, but I also don't want to get sued. So I'm just going to change one letter at the beginning of their names. Anyway, Leona, the most insufferable female main character you will ever have the pleasure of spending time with. Yes, even worse than Bella from Twilight. And that's saying a lot. Leona is currently on her bachelorette party because somehow she got engaged. So we're at her bachelorette party, and I'm just gonna read you the opening line because I think it really sets the scene. Most young women don't imagine their bachelorette party at a swamp in the middle of bumfuck nowhere, Florida. Iconic writing and iconic bachelorette party, okay? Absolutely love it. Now, Leona makes it very clear immediately to us within the first 3 paragraphs that she is not like other girls. Okay, she is different. She is edgy. She's unique. She's quirky. Sue her. So not only is Leona's bachelorette party in a swamp, okay, but it's also at a silent retreat. If any of my friends are watching this video, don't get any ideas, because for me, this is the worst bachelorette party of all time, and Leona actually agrees. So you might be wondering, whose idea was this? If Leona's not into it, what are her friends thinking? So this was organized by Victoria Fark. Now, because of my accent, every time I say Victoria Fark, it does sound like I'm saying Victoria Fark, and I used voice to text to write my notes. So she's now Mrs. Fuck. Victoria is Leona's sister-in-law because Leona is engaged to Lawrence Fuck. And yes, this is based on Lord Farquaad, hence Fark. So these two are sibbies, okay? They're sibbies and they're also besties. As you can probably tell from the fact that Victoria clearly does not know what Leona's into, these two have a bit of a love-hate relationship, okay? Leona does semi-like Victoria because Leona used to be really, really poor, and Victoria basically took Leona under her wing and said, hey, let me show you the biggest glow-up of all time. So she kind of gave Leona this pretty woman makeover. She introduced her to the LA socialite scene, showed her what luxury is like. And Leona, obviously growing up in poverty, was like, hell yeah, this slays. But Leona also has a few icks with Victoria, okay? One of them, which is so niche, being that Victoria always passive aggressively makes comments towards Leona about the fact that she like doesn't live a vegan lifestyle, which I find honestly so funny because that was me in 2016. And to anyone that I did that to, this is your apology video. I'm deeply, deeply sorry. Now I can agree. That's fucking annoying. So at the bachelorette party, we have Victoria, who organized it. We have the girls, which is Hannah, Rachel, and Polly. And then we have Ellie as well. So these people are all in attendance. And from what I'm reading, they all hate each other. Like nobody's friends. They all hate each other. And Leona especially, because she's not like other girls. She just doesn't feel like she can really connect with these girls. Not only is Leona thrust into a bachelorette party where she doesn't have any friends really, but also she's at a silent retreat. And since Leona is the most insufferable human being I've ever met, she also can't shut the fuck up. She mentions that she's already broken the silence about 70 times. And right now in the story, we're sitting in this silent meditation with a teacher, right? And Leona turns to Ellie and says, I'm bored. And keep in mind, there's literally a meditation instructor right there. She simply cannot read the fucking room. Now, Ellie, who this is literally her only moment in this story, she never comes up again. Leona feels like Ellie is really uncomfortable in Leona's presence. And I find that so funny because same. I'm kind of team Ellie right now because Leona's simply the worst. Despite this tragic bachelorette party, it does seem kind of fitting for this engagement because Leona is quick to share that the engagement is also tragic. Am I talking about the dress? No. Am I talking about the venue? No. I'm talking about the man, the fiance, okay? Lawrence fuck. Leona thinks Lawrence is as exciting as a slice of white bread. Okay, in her words, she says, he is as bland and stereotypical as a 3-ingredient recipe. If somebody said that about me, I would actually pass away, especially my fiance. Like she really said, I don't care about this man. So the main reason that Leona likes Lawrence is because he's hot-ish, nice-ish, but mainly he's rich, okay? He is the heir of the dual lock home security empire, which is apparently wildly profitable. Now, I can't confirm this. So if any of you watching are also heirs of home security empires, please drop a comment and let me know. Are you rich? Leona describes Lawrence as polite, professional, and kind-ish to everyone's faces, but behind their back, Lawrence is gonna talk hella shit about you. Leona says that Lawrence will tear people apart like he's Chef Gordon Ramsay and everyone else is just an idiot sandwich. Period. Why do I kind of like this man? He's a bit of a king, like, let's be real. He's an heir, but he's also a king. So as I mentioned before, these two are besties, and Leona is a little creeped out by their relationship, okay? These are fully grown adults, to be fair, and apparently they like wear matching clothes and just always are around each other. Like they're completely gravitating towards each other. And that makes me think that they're twins, but they're not twins. They just have that kind of energy, that dynamic. Despite Lawrence's bitchy behavior, Leona's main ick with him is his Shrek. She makes it clear that the size isn't the problem, although she does also make it clear, you know what I mean? She's like, it's not the problem, but then also like completely shreds him to pieces in that department. She says that she's not Shrek shaming him. Okay, she says, I'm all about Shrek positivity and whatnot. Queen. Didn't know that was a thing, but love to hear it. The problem that she has is that he doesn't use anything but his Shrek to pleasure her. And she's really feels like she's tried to spice things up and he just basically doesn't give a fuck. But luckily for her, she has Buzz. Yes, You know what I'm talking about. And she has named it. She literally named it Buzz. And yes, it was absolutely necessary that I make a character card. Finishing off her bitch about Lawrence, she says, he can be judgy, but he did decide to pick me, of all people. And I was thinking, oh my God, that's actually quite sad. She obviously has really low self-esteem. Well, most guys would pick me in a crowded room. I've got huge boobs, porn star lips, and an ass that won't quit. Now, as you can imagine, Leona, having only 3 brain cells, is doing too much thinking on this silent retreat. So she announces, in fact, in this silent meditation room, like the bitch that she is, that she's going to go and take a nap. But what do we think she's actually going to go and do? Meanwhile, over in a nearby swamp in Florida, we are introduced to Beck. Remember, no lawsuits here, only terrible fucking names. Bestie Beck is having a really shitty morning because he wants some meat, and specifically he wants some human meat, but humans rarely venture into this random swamp that Beck lives in. Basically, if humans discover them, then it risks exposing this entire magical community because Beck is not the only species, I guess, of magical creature that lives in this swamp. And so Beck has a cottage at the front of this swamp so that if anybody ventures in, he basically eats them. Luckily, in his words, he says that most of them are homeless junkies with nobody to care. Beck is described, and when I say that, I mean he describes himself as a 7-foot green, hilarious, and gut-wrenchingly handsome creature. As you can tell, like Leona, he's incredibly humble. Despite being hot and sexy, he does in fact have feelings, and he sometimes feels a little bit lonely because he's the only ogre in his swamp. We find out that he doesn't really have parents or friends. Sounds like someone else I know. Beck talks about this perception that everybody has that ogres only eat meat, but he actually loves vegetables and gardening. And then he ruins it by telling us that he finds gardening really erotic. He says there's something so erotic about it. And I just think we need to cancel him. So I am going to put him in jail. Back in Leona's neck of the woods, she wakes up sweating, confused. She can feel silky sheets beneath her. She tries to move, but her arms, they're tied behind her head and to her headboard, and she's covered in oil. The shred of self-awareness that this woman has is that she knows she should be panicked, but instead she says, I struggle against the ropes around my wrists, ignoring the pain. In fact, enjoying the pain. I don't want to escape. I told you, she's the worst. Despite being captured and bound to a bed and weirdly covered in oil, despite all of that, she gets incredibly turned on and begins to rub her thighs together in order to try and satiate her hunger, okay? And then her captor walks into the room. Now, let's just pause here for a second. I want us to all put ourselves in this position for a second, okay? Really think, what would I do in this situation? Personally, I might scream, okay? I might beg this strange captor to let me go. And I'm sure we can trust Leona to do the same thing. I need you. They start getting freaky, her and her captor, as you do, and he whispers, do you like that? And she says yes and opens her eyes, but now it's no longer her captor. It turns out that it's Lawrence, and she's no longer bound. She's no longer oiled. Lawrence is just on top of her. And now she screams. Now she screams when her fiancé is on top of her. She wakes up shocked and confused because yes, it was all a dream. And GM Fairy just wasted my goddamn time. Upon waking, Leona realizes that she clearly has some demons that she's battling. I mean, I could have told you that for free, but since she has those 3 brain cells that I've mentioned, it took her a little bit longer. So she decides that she needs a little bit of air, a little bit of time to herself. So she pulls out a notepad and writes down a message for the girls, Ellie and Victoria, aka the bachelorette party, and says, I need some time. Don't come looking for me. And then she whips on her dress, laces up her boots, and frolics into the woods. And as she is running directionless into the woods, she decides, A, she's not going to take the main path because she's not that kind of girl. And B, she's going to ignore all of the danger and keep out signs that she sees. And that is testament to the fact that she's stupid. I'm not trying to be a pick-me girl by saying that walking alone in the woods at night doesn't scare me. In fact, there's not a lot that does. The reason that she doesn't get scared and basically has the emotional capacity of a brick wall is because her childhood sounded absolutely terrible. She says that her parents not only were abusive and alcoholics, but also they would neglect her massively. They would literally like take her to school and leave her there, leave her at the grocery store, just abandon her, which is obviously very sad. So she's thinking about all of this as she walks further and further into the woods. And her original plan was she just wanted to find a nice rock or something to sit on and scroll on her phone. But she kind of didn't think, because again, 3 brain cells, that there's no reception in the woods. And because she's gotten so lost in her thoughts, she's gotten very lost in the woods. Luckily, she has her priorities straight. She says, as I said, I'm not afraid of being alone in the woods, but if I don't have my coffee in the morning, I might actually pass away. And driven only by the need for caffeine and not her need to survive. She sees a billow of smoke and she walks through this clearing and decides, I'm going to go and follow that smoke. She sees a cottage where the smoke is coming from and decides that's where I'm going to go. So she charges towards it and then she falls to the ground and everything fades to black. Beck, who is currently in jail but not in the story, he awakes to the sound of a human scream and he's like, it must be Christmas. It is my lucky day. So he leaps out of bed like a little kid. It turns out that he has a trap set up and Leona has fallen into that trap because she has no survival instincts. And Beck is like, something's here. I just heard a scream. So he looks down the hole and what does he see? He sees the sexiest woman who's ever lived. Now, this is Beck's first human woman that he's ever seen. He is gooped and gagged. Now, the first thing that he notices about Leona is how cute and tiny and small and dainty and weak she is. Beck scoops Leona out of his trap and holds her in his arms because she's so tiny and he's so big and carries her home. But on the walk home, he stares at her nips and describes them in excruciating detail. So he is thinking about how badly he wants to smash this human woman, okay? And when she wakes up in his arms, she doesn't feel the same, unfortunately, because this is her first ogre. And I would say that ogres are much scarier than human women. So she opens her eyes and she screams. Beck is like, oh, fuck, nobody can hear this chick scream again. So he covers her mouth with his hand and begins to panic because basically if he releases her, then the entire magical swamp community is at risk of exposure. If Leona leaves this community, she's going to run and tell everybody that she's seen a hulking 7-foot sexy ogre. Leona, God bless her tiny cute little soul, she tries to kick him and Beck is basically like, lol, you're so tiny and weak. That's not going to do anything. So he ties her mouth with a cloth. He binds her so that she can't move. Something that never gets explained, but which I found incredibly weird in this writing, was when he was trying to tie her up, he mentions that she's actually quite slippery, which I'm like, what reason does she have to be slippery? She keeps trying to run away. He's like, this is genuinely frustrating because I actually don't want to hurt you because I want to have sex with you. So they're in a real conundrum here. Luckily, Beck just happens to have a cage next to his bed. Because he is so chivalrous, he gets some pillows and some blankets and he builds her a cozy little bed on the floor of this cage. And then he shoves her in and locks the door. So just remember, if he wanted to, he would. The next day, is mayhem, okay? Beck is freaking out. He doesn't know what he's going to do. And he's currently at a town meeting of sorts. It turns out that Beck was not the only one that heard the scream of this human woman. Everybody knows there's somebody in this swamp community and we are at risk. So what the hell are we going to do about it? Now, they are freaking out because they're at risk of exposure, but it's heavily implied that they're also freaking out because nobody has seen a human woman before and they all kind of want to get a little looky look. Beck is very angry at this thought because he found her and therefore he believes that he owns her. So nobody is allowed to think about her, talk about her, look at her, touch her because she is his. Period. Beck gets called to the front of the town meeting, and a little bit of context. Okay, this town is actually run by a bunch of board members. That's what these people are called. I just think GM Ferry has never heard of a local council in her life. So they are called the board members, and the main guy is Henry Coilsworth. He never comes up again, but basically Henry is about to interrogate the out of Beck. Okay, Beck, this is the roasting between the board members and Beck. The first question that gets asked is how old Leona looks, which objectively weird question to start with, but pop off. Beck can't answer because obviously he's never seen a human woman before. And the follow-up question is, does she look like she's in her childbearing years? To which Beck says yes. They ask, where is she now? And he says, she's tied up in a cage in my cottage. I actually feel that we need to put Leona in the jail simply because she's currently in a cage. Leona's in a physical representation of the cage now, okay? But Beck is still in metaphorical jail because he finds gardening erotic, which is just really weird. Anyway, the board members decide that the only possible way to move forward is if Beck kills Leona. And they're like, bestie Beck, this is great for you because you can actually eat her. And we know that you find humans really tasty. And the board members are like, does anyone object? And Beck screams, no. And as a reader, this part is really confusing because they asked if anyone objected and he screams no. But we know that he actually means yes, but it's just, I don't know. Beck, he's not the sharpest tool in the shed. Beck is like, I need to think of a plan, stat. So he argues that he's a little bit lonely. Okay, bestie Beck has no friends, no family. He's like, I'm a sad boy. How about I keep Leona as my slave? As my little slave, and she can help me with gardening, which he finds really erotic, and household chores, and basically live with him as a servant. He also makes it very clear that there's no way Leona could ever escape because she's so tiny and weak, as he mentions every 5 seconds. And then Beck's like, why am I trying to save this random human woman? What could this possibly mean? He thinks, I don't want her company, ... I just want to protect her for some odd reason. Oh, he obviously really, really likes her. It must be her rack. A nice pair of tits always ruins a man's judgment. Beck must have said something right because the board members agree. Beck walks home from the board meeting with Donnie, his bestie who he hates. Now, just a quick note that AI would literally not generate a centaur, but Donnie is meant to be a centaur. So he's this hulking, six-pack, Greek god-looking blonde dude with the torso of a man and then the body and legs of a horse. It's immediately clear that Donnie is the worst. He's just a piece of shit. And Beck tells us, the reader, that Donnie's not really his friend. He says he annoys the fuck out of me. So again, him and Leona really do have a lot in common. Donnie is talking to Beck and says, I really want to meet this human woman. And it's very clear that his intention is creepy and sexual. Beck is obviously immediately really upset with Donnie, and he makes it very clear that if Donnie even touches Leona, he's gonna die. And Beck is so much bigger and stronger than Donnie that Donnie's like, okay, chill out. He picks Donnie up and throws him on the ground because violence is always the answer. Beck again pauses and he's like, huh, why do I care so much about this woman? Back at home, Leona wakes up disoriented in the cage. Honestly, she's quite surprised that she even did wake up. She was very much expecting to have been murdered at this point. She looks across the room and she sees Beck there and he's cooking. He's cooking a meal. So she takes this opportunity to check him out a little bit. She's like, did he capture me? Yes. Also, is he over 7 foot? And does he have sexy muscles? Also, yes. Leona is really confused as to why Beck hasn't killed her. And she looks over at Beck and they make eye contact and they share a moment, okay? And Leona notices that Beck is giving her this look. I'm going to reenact this, okay, because I think it's important. So I am Beck and you are Leona. Leona's 3 brain cells go into overdrive and she comes to the conclusion that he's looking a little bit guilty. All of a sudden, Leona has this epiphany. She's like, this ogre is probably not going to hurt me. And maybe she could even persuade him to let her go. Beck walks over to her and delivers her a plate of French toast, which, I mean, we love a man who can cook, but I don't know. The idea of an ogre eating French toast doesn't sit right with me. Anyway, she's like, I'm not going to eat that because you're probably trying to kill me. And also I'm literally gagged. Not gagged as in I'm gagged. Gagged as in you have put a fucking gag in my mouth. So he leans forward to remove said gag. And here we have it, folks. They have their Edward Bella touching the AC in the car moment, okay? Beck grazes her face as he goes to remove her gag and basically it's electric. He has a moment. His breathing slows. He's obviously really into it. And Leona admits that he smells really good and his touch feels really good, but he can get fucked if he thinks he's about to have a romantic moment with her right now. She's pissed off at him. She's in a cage. They have a conversation which is so boring. Basically, she's like, let me go. And he's like, not gonna happen. She says, if it's money that you're after, lucky for you, I'm actually engaged to the heir of a dual lock security system fortune. Let me give you some money. And Beck is like, what do you mean you're engaged? And then inside, he's like, what are all these feelings I'm feeling? Why do I feel jealous? He's upset because he's like, don't I own her? Like I found her. Don't I own her? What do you mean fiance? He can't process this information. He's like, I'm not going to kill you, but I do have to keep you here. And she's like, well, I have a life to get back to. So what are we going to do? She also says that if he doesn't let her go, she's going to try and escape. To which he replies, honey, I'd like to see you try. I can smell you from a mile away. I can take one step and outrun you. You don't even know how to get through these woods. I suggest you don't try running away. You'll regret that. Again, little reminiscent of Twilight. It's giving Edward in the tree. You think you can outrun me? Leona thinks for a second about her plan. She's like, I might be the tiniest, weakest, smallest human being that's ever lived, but I am also the hottest and sexiest human that's ever lived. And also, she's like, I saw the way that Beck looked at me. She says, I think the feminist gods will forgive me if I use a little seduction to get out of the clutches of an ogre. Operation Pussy Trap commence. Literally put this on my tombstone. That's just the best thing ever. Esme, do you want to make a comment on Operation Pussy Trap? Thank you so much for your words. A few hours later, Beck comes back to deliver her some more food. This time, he's whipped up some roast chicken, potatoes, and carrots. Now, I can respect that he's chefing it up. If you are going to kidnap someone, at least give them some nice food. At the sight of the food that Beck has cooked, Leona licks her lips. She licks her juicy, full, perfect lips. And Beck is, we've already established, obsessed with her. So he instantly gets turned on. And let me just say, he has no idea what's coming, literally and figuratively. And neither do you. Let's just cut straight to the chase. Leona starts shrekking herself off. right in front of him in order to seduce him. So that is Operation Pussy Trap. She's hoping that she will seduce him enough that then he will let her go. Honestly, her plan kind of sucks, but I don't expect anything else from her. Basically, she's striking herself off. He pulls out his giant green Shrek, and she's flabbergasted because he has the biggest Shrek she's ever seen. So then he starts shrekking himself off. As if it wasn't already weird enough, she's locked in a cage. And also there's a plate of potatoes, carrots, and chicken just sitting there watching. I would personally throw myself in the compost if I was that plate of food. Honorable mention to Beck's favorite phrase, which is hold back my seed. Also, this phrase right here. When they're done, Beck says, well, that was a fun show. I bet you worked up an appetite there. Ready to eat? And Leona's pissed because not only did Operation Pussy Trap completely fail, but also she very much was intending on faking it, but actually she had a really great time. She also is pissed off because now that she's seen the Shrek of all Shreks, she can't stop thinking about it. She has been Shreknatized, as they say. They eat their plates of potatoes, carrot, and roast chicken, which have seen way too much. And he finally asks for her name. Yes, they don't know each other's names at this point, and they've shreked off in front of each other. He goes for a handshake, and she looks at his giant hand, and she's like, oh yeah, my mind is going places right now. She says, oh my God, Leona, get a hold of yourself. This is Operation Pussy Trap, not Operation Stockholm Syndrome. Mic drop. Despite the weird tension between these two absolute freaks, absolute scoundrels, Leona starts to long for Mr. Fuck, okay? She wants to be Mrs. Fuck, to put it simply. She wants to be flying to Bora Bora in first class. She wants to be eating caviar off a sexy man's abs. She wants to be drinking Cristal. Okay, she does not want to be in this dirty ass swamp in buttfuck nowhere, Florida. And she certainly does not want to be in that swamp in buttfuck nowhere in Florida in a cage. I would argue that her own stupidity got her in there. Like, I'm not trying to victim blame because she obviously has been kidnapped, but also there were so many things that she could have done to not get herself in that situation. Stay on the path. Don't go into the woods at night. Don't go towards a strange random cottage. Maybe tell your friends where you're going. At every turn, she fucked up. So do I feel a little bit bad for her? Yes. Do I feel very bad for her? Absolutely not. She finally asks Beck the $1 million question, which is, wait a second, why am I here? Why do you need to lock me up? Why are you keeping me here? Why do you want me here? And Beck replies, it's not that I want you to stay here with me. And this is Leona's reaction. I can't help the drop of disappointment in my stomach. Leona, babe, get a grip. Do you want to be here locked in a cage with this random fucking ogre who's just kidnapped you? Or do you want to randomly go back to this guy and go to Bora Bora? I thought you hated this guy. I thought you hated this guy. Stop flip-flopping every page. It's really starting to piss me off. Beck explains to her that he is not the only magical creature in this swamp. He says there's fairies, gnomes, centaurs, elves, and many more. And Leona wants to know if she's the first human that's entered this swamp, which is a valid question. And Beck, unfortunately, does have to tell her that not only has he encountered humans, he's actually also eaten them. He quickly says, though, I don't think I could ever eat another human again. You'd think, right? If we were, you and me, right? We're in this situation. You'd be like, I'm terrified now because you've kidnapped me. I'm human. You've just admitted to eating other humans. So I'm sure, again, we can trust Leona to have the same reaction because that's what any normal person would. Don't say that. Fuck. Why does my mind go to a dirty place? Leona, babe, you would need your therapist to get therapy. And then you would need that therapist to get therapy. You would start this chain of therapists needing therapy because That's how fucked up you are. Beck finally answers her question by explaining that if he lets her go, he puts the entire magical community at risk, and then it puts everybody at risk of being killed by humans, which is ironic because he has just literally listed every single creature that lives in this swamp, which I feel like he didn't have to do. He could have just been like, oh, I'm an ogre randomly living in this swamp on my own, but he doesn't think with his brain. He thinks with, say it together, everybody, his Shrek. Leona begins crying because she realizes Operation Pussy Trap is not going to work. She cannot use her Leonussi to get out of this one, but she does declare Operation Pussy Trap is still a go. I will get out of here, even if I die trying. It's a new day, and Leona is now out of the cage because Beck is taking her on a swamp tour, baby. The first stop randomly is the outdoor bathroom, which she spends 15 minutes crying in, which honestly is the most relatable thing she's done so far. I just couldn't get over the fact that I might spend the rest of my pathetic life shitting in a hole outside. That, my friends, is my favorite quote of the book, and I really need somebody to put that on a t-shirt. Beck's property actually sounds like the perfect off-the-grid weekend getaway, if I'm being so real. There's like this beautiful spring kind of nestled somewhere in his property where you can swim in. He's got a chicken coop, a garden. He's got fruit trees. As Beck takes Leona around the property though, she's like, I need to plan my escape, everybody. Also, just as a side note, at this point in the book, we randomly shift from past tense to present tense, which was not a literary device. I think Georgia May just literally forgot how to write for a second. It's not relevant, but I just thought it was worth mentioning because I had a little giggle at that. So Leona has an escape plan, and when nightfall comes, it's time to execute it. She asks him, do I have to sleep in the cage tonight? And he's like, no, but I only have one bed, so you'll have to sleep with me. Not the only one bed trope. If you guys don't read like romance novels, this trope is huge, and it's just so funny to me that it's even trickled its way into Shrek erotica. Leona tries really hard to keep herself awake because that's literally her whole plan, is that she's going to stay awake, and then when he falls asleep, she's going to escape. Unfortunately, because she's a dumbass, she falls asleep. I think she honestly spent all of her energy thinking about the plan because she doesn't use her brain very much, clearly. And so when the plan actually came to being executed, she literally flopped. Luckily for her and for us, in the middle of the night, she wakes up and Beck is sleeping, and she watches him sleep. And she's like, this man is massive and sexy. She says, he could break my neck without even exerting much energy. And for some odd reason, that turns me on. God, do I need a therapist? As he sleeps, her eyes trail down his body. And she's like, oh, he's wearing pants. But not just any pants. Grey sweatpants. On what planet would Shrek be caught dead in grey sweatpants? The grey sweatpants was definitely Georgia May's attempt at getting regular girlies to be attracted to this green ogre, because I would argue that it's a bit niche to find Shrek sexy, but throw some grey sweatpants on him. Because she's a freak, she begins to look at the outline, you know what I'm saying, under the grey sweatpants, and she just can't help herself. Now that she's seen the Shrek, she's like, I simply have to touch my Leonussi. So that's exactly what she does. She begins to visualize what it would be like for them to do terrible, terrible things to each other. And she starts Shrekking herself off. And as she's doing so, she opens her eyes and realizes, it looks like Beck is also Shrekking himself off. Again, these two absolute freaks of nature are staring at each other while Shrekking themselves off. They rub their collective 5 brain cells together and think, wouldn't this make more sense if we like Shreked each other off? And so thank God for everybody, that's exactly what they do. I'm obviously not going to go into details. However, my favorite quotes from this section is Leona saying, I've always thought I was well endowed with my D cups. Beck's finger is bigger than Lawrence's Shrek. I love that like every paragraph she takes a jab at Lawrence. She just hates this man. Finally, because I was so traumatized by this that now I have to trauma dump on you because you chose to watch this video. She says, I want it so deep down my throat and in my Leonussi that it touches the other side. And I had to read this. You're lucky I'm changing the words. I had to read the proper scenes, and I think I need therapy, and then I think my therapist will need a therapist, and so on and so forth. After they've gotten a little bit freaky, but not all the way freaky, and it was mainly her getting sweet, sweet relief, if you know what I mean, she says, this time I'm not falling asleep. I'll wait until he dozes off, and then I'm out. Horny or not. While she's thinking this, Beck rolls over and starts to reflect on what's just happened. And he's basically like, listen, yes, I'm a monster. Yes, I'm an ogre, but I need to start behaving like a gentleman and not just think with my Shrek. He says, I feel as if I would die for this woman I barely know, but I do know her. She's mine. I feel it deep in my core. The second I saw her lying at the bottom of my trap, I knew she was made for me and me alone. My instinct tells me to mark her, to fill her with my seed. Mental health check? How are we doing? This 2 minutes of thinking is evidently the most self-reflecting Beck has ever done because he falls asleep instantly and Leona's like, here we go, babes. It's escape time. She makes sure that Beck is still asleep, which he is, and then she tiptoes across the room to the front door. She puts her hand on the door handle and she looks back longingly at Beck and she's like, do I have feelings for him or is it Stockholm Syndrome? Either way, I'm not sticking around to find out. I am out of here, bitch. Because she is the dumbest person that's ever existed. She's barefoot and doesn't know where she's going. So she's like, I'm just going to run in a random direction barefoot in the woods in the middle of the night. I shouldn't be disappointed in her because I should expect it. But every time I'm like, Leona, babes, come on. Like have at least a shred of survival instinct. Why would you run in a random direction in the forest in the middle of the night? That's exactly how you got yourself in this situation in the first place. As she runs, she does acknowledge that she's a fucking psycho. She's like, I just feel trapped between these two desires right now. She definitely doesn't want to be a prisoner. And part of her wants to go back to her old life. But then there's this other part of her, the crazy part, where she's like, I low-key hope that Beck comes and like finds me and captures me right now. I think also this option is exciting because it means that she kind of gets a get out of jail free card with this guy. If she stays with him, then like she doesn't have to confront Lawrence. She can just be like, I was kidnapped. What are you going to do about it? You know, it's a very convenient excuse. As she's thinking this, a hand reaches for her arm and Beck topples on top of her and they slam down to the ground. She screams, get off me, let me go. But she's also like, nobody's going to hear me. And even if they did, nobody's going to come and save me. And then she's like, why does that make me excited? If Leona was in the Hunger Games, okay, you know, when they do the countdown, they're like standing on their little podiums and it's like 3, 2, 1. Instantly, she would take all of her clothes off, start shrekking herself off, and then like be really excited when someone came over to kill her. Beck is currently laying on top of Leona, as we know, and he starts moving his hand down, 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 down. And then he gets to her Leonussi and he says, Leona, you have 2 options, babe. Option 1, I'll let you go. Option 2, let's get freaky. Now, as we know, Leona's only motivation as a character up to this point is that she wants to escape. So perfect. He's literally just given her an out. So what do we think she does? Her answer to his proposition is to kiss him. She's decided. She's made her decision and she chose Shrek. Anyway, the next part, Beck devours her like it's his last meal, saying, oh, this is the only way I'd eat a human. Ugh. At this point, I am sick to my stomach because of what I'm reading. And also I'm so fucking pissed off at Leona. I feel like she's wasted all of our time because this whole book, all she's wanted to do is escape. And it's literally handed to her on a silver platter. And she's like, no, let's just roll around in the forest a little bit instead. To cut the next chapter in half, they smash. And before he puts it in, she is literally sobbing. She's described as she sobs because that's how badly she wants it. And also he says that he will die if he doesn't get it right now. I'll spare you the explicit details. However, these are some of my favorite quotes. Her sobs echo through the forest. Beck, fork me like you hate me. It feels like I've found my purpose. I've never been impaled by a monster Shrek before. Leona wakes up the next morning feeling euphoric. She's on top of the world and nothing can bring her down. She is, however, aware. She's like, I probably should feel embarrassed because I just smashed this guy who not only captured me, but then locked me in a cage and then also gave me the opportunity for freedom. And instead I chose his Shrek. But I don't think she has the emotional capacity to actually feel embarrassed. So she's like, I should be embarrassed. But it was great. It was a great time and I don't regret it at all. She says she's the happiest she's been in a long time, which I feel like that shows how like horrific her life has been. Beck sees that she's awake and he says, we should go into town because we've torn your clothes to shreds. Leona thinks, the thought of seeing the village excites me. I don't know if I've fully accepted that I'm staying here with Beck, but I'm more comfortable with the idea and want to see my potential new neighborhood. She has literally smashed this guy once, doesn't care that she's a captive anymore, and is now like, let's go check out my new neighborhood. Like, I'm done. She's giving us absolutely nothing. We love a strong female character. She's like, what am I going to wear into town, Beck? And Beck says, I think I have a potato sack around here that you can wear and I can cut some holes in. Leona might have zero decision-making skills, but the one thing she knows is that she will not be caught dead in a potato sack. So she's like, here's a great idea. Beck, why don't you go into town without me? And Beck's like, absolutely not, babe. And Leona's like, why? She's really butthurt about it. And Beck's like, bestie, you literally just tried to escape. So I'm not going to leave you here on your own. That's the dumbest thing I could ever do. She says, what do you think I'm doing now? Pretending to like you so I can get away? That was the plan yesterday, babe. She tells him that she's no longer faking it and that she actually does want him. And he says, so you're happy to stay with me then? And she says, well, I don't know about that, but maybe we can figure out how I can get back home together. Beck is like, not gonna happen. She says, for now, I guess I'll just be an ogre's sex slave. The thought genuinely thrills me. So yeah, basically she stopped caring and now she's happy to live her silly little life with Beck. I think I like this. They enter the town and everybody is staring. And it's not because Leona is dressed in a potato sack. Yes, she did put the potato sack on. It's not because of that. It's because despite the potato sack, she's literally the hottest woman that's ever walked the planet. Now, Beck has already made it very clear that he's very territorial over Leona. As Beck is seething in his jealousy, he notices Donnie the centaur, looking Leona up and down, all creepy. And Beck's like, red flag, red flag, red flag. And Beck would know because he is a red flag. Beck is about to go up and strangle Donnie, but then Leona distracts Beck by beginning to ask him questions about this community. Beck tells her that the community manages to stay hidden because the local council, the local Floridian council, gets things from them. Beck says, they keep us a secret and we make it worth their while. How? Leona says. Beck says, some of our members are pretty valuable. For example, we have an alchemist. The idea that a local government in Florida is keeping this entire magical community a secret because they have an alchemist is just so funny to me. GM Fairy, babe, Georgia May, you're unhinged. They arrive at the clothing shop, spelt shopper SHOPPE, because this is magical. And we're introduced to Godmummy Gilda, aka the fairy godmother. Now, I am going to put a photo up on the screen, trigger warning, because it's traumatizing. When I first tried to generate an AI image of this fairy godmother, this is what AI generated. And I just think we all need to really appreciate that and possibly make t-shirts. Immediately, I'm obsessed with Gilda. All hail Queen Gilda, because the first thing she does is roasts Leona's outfit. She's like, what the are you wearing? She takes Leona to the changing room and she's going to have a little makeover montage. And while this is happening, Beck is obviously sitting out in the store and he hears the ding of the shop door opening, and in walks Winston LaRue, a young wizard. Remember how I was laughing because the local government keeps them a secret because they get an alchemist in return? You have a literal wizard and you're going to choose an alchemist. I'm so sorry. Just so funny to me. Alchemist supremacy, baby. Up the alchemist. Winston sits down next to Beck for some one-on-one bro time, and boy, does he have some tea to spill. Winston basically says, hey, Beck, listen, I have discovered this potion. And what this potion does is it wipes memory. So Leona could take this potion, forget everything that she's learned about this magical wizarding community. It's the perfect solution. She can leave and go back to her life, and we aren't at risk of being exposed. Beck lifts Winston up by his collar like the big bully that he is, basically shakes him and says, who else knows about this? Winston says, oh, it's just me and the wizards. Don't worry about it, babe. Beck's like, this stays between us. Don't you fucking dare tell anybody else about this. She would be gagged if she found out about this potion, and also about the fact that Beck is keeping this a secret because she begged him to help her get out. Maybe they could work on it together, she said. Winston leaves and Leona walks out of the dressing room looking like she was chiseled out of marble because, lest we forget, she's the hottest woman that's ever walked planet Earth. Beck is in awe. He basically says in front of Gilda that he wants to ravage her. Leona's like, can't you just chill until we get home? Home? And Beck's like, home? And he was feeling a little bit guilty about this potion. But when he heard Leona call his little swamp cottage home, he knew he'd made the right decision. Now we get our I think I like this little life montage. Leona has been passing the time with gardening, journaling, taking walks, smashing Shrek's brains out, and a lot of time to think, which I wonder how her tiny little pea brain is handling all of that thinking. She's also been spending a lot of time with Beck outside of his Shrek, getting to know him beyond the muscles, okay? She's found out now that his parents are dead, but she doesn't know how. Even so, she still feels closer to him than she ever did to Lawrence. Again, another jab at Lawrence. She just can't shut up about him. It does feel a little bit like she's obsessed with this man, given how much she roasts him. As she's watching Beck chop some wood, she starts to think, wait a second, what if I do actually like this little life? She decides this is too much thinking. So she leaves Beck, who's chopping wood, and she decides she's going to go for a swim in that little spring that I mentioned. She says, Beck said that although people in the town know of the spring, no one ever visits. Hopefully a leech won't crawl in my Leah Nussy. Of course, that's the first thought that she has, of course. As she's floating naked in this spring, staring up at the beautiful sky, she hears a little rustle in the bushes and she's like, oh, it's my ogre daddy coming to ravage me. But no, it's Donnie. He says, just the person I'd hope to find alone someday. Creep. Little disclaimer here, okay? Because you guys know that normally I hate Leona. I am in fact the CEO and co-founder of the anti-Leona hate club. However, she unfortunately kind of eats in this scene, okay? She really does have a backbone here. So basically, Donnie says, you don't need to be afraid of me, babe. Don't be scared. I'm a friend of Beck's. And Leona says, okay, cool, dude, but I'm naked right now. Can you leave? Donnie refuses to leave and he grabs her dress and holds it up. which is definitely him trying to like hold power over her. It's just a creepy thing to do. So she's like, okay, what else can I do but get out of the water? She's still naked, remember? So she gets out of the water, snatches her dress off him and goes into a bush to get changed. Donnie mentions again that he's Beck's only friend, and Leona goes, he's never said anything about you before. Donnie then gives her a creepy up and down look, as he does. That's his move. And then he tells her that Beck is the way that he is because of what happened to his parents. And then, unsolicited, he goes on to tell her exactly how it happened. So Beck's parents lived on the edge of town, but it wasn't for the same reason that Beck does. Beck is living there because he wants to protect his community, but they just wanted it. Like, they just didn't want to be part of the town, right? And one day this kid comes in, because they are the first barrier before you get to the main part of the town, as we know. And this kid comes and he seems really lost. And so Beck's mum is like, well, let me try and help this kid, this human kid, find his way home. So she's a giving queen. But basically, the kid's dad, it turns out, was not far behind his kid and sees an ogre and shoots her. And she dies. And then Beck's dad hears the whole thing. So he runs out and then sees his wife dead. And he then shoots the kid's dad. And we don't know what happened to the kid. So I'm like, this kid must be traumatized, this poor kid. Beck's dad ends up, trying to live through it, but eventually can't. And he ends up shooting himself as well. Leona, for once in her life, has the right reaction, which is, oh my God, that's traumatizing and awful. He must be so traumatized. And Donnie's like, he's an ogre. They don't really deal with their feelings. So if it's going to happen to anyone, it's good that it happened to him. Leona says, I thought you said you guys were best friends. It doesn't seem like you know him very well. Pop off. Honestly, I hate that I like her in this scene. Leona has always gotten a funny feeling about Donnie, but especially right now, she's like, oh, my gut is telling me this guy is bad news. And this is instantly validated when Donnie grabs her arm and he says, how about I show you what it feels like to be with a real magical being instead of that smelly ogre. Leona protests and starts screaming, but Donnie instantly puts his hand over her mouth. And I'm going to spare you the details of this next scene because you can probably sense the direction that this is going. But essentially, Donnie forces himself on her and it's about to like completely violate her when Beck comes bursting into the scene. Donnie's like, I was just trying to have fun. And Beck smashes his face in and keeps going and basically beats Donnie to a pulp. Eventually, Leona is like, Beck, babe, listen, I know he's bad news, but stop because you're actually going to kill this guy. And so Beck stops and Donnie is literally like so bloody and mangled and is in a crumpled heap on the floor. Leona wants to confirm that Donnie is still alive, which he is in fact alive. And then she turns to Beck and she notices that Beck is absolutely seething in anger. He is so mad. He instantly makes it about him by being like, I can't believe that somebody else touched you. And then she's comforting him, which is really terrible because as far as I knew, she's the one that was just traumatized. So way to go, babe. Beck says, you're mine. You were made for me. How could he not see that? He then proceeds to take her dress off. Predictably, they smash on the floor next to Donnie. And these are some of my favorite lines. I never knew someone covered in someone else's blood could turn me on so much. And my second favorite line of the book, you thrust, thrust, mine thrust. Honestly, this bitch needs an Oscar. Or what's the book? She needs to win the Booker Prize, okay? Because this is the best literature I've ever read, babe. It's so good. As they conclude their little session, he leans over her and he whispers in her ear, I love you. So really bad timing for that one, considering everything that's just gone on. Leona does not respond. So they get up and they wash themselves in the spring because obviously they're covered in Donnie's blood, and they smash again. They do. Afterwards, Beck decides to do some self-reflection. He wonders, does Leona love her fiance? And is it even possible to love two people at once? He believes genuinely that they were like put on this planet to be together. He thinks that she was made for him. But he also finally understands that loving someone does not mean you own them. So I guess that's growth. He has an epiphany moment and he decides that he loves her so much that he's going to do what's best for her. And he's going to tell her about this potion. Leona is currently asleep. So Beck's like, I'm going to tell her about this when she wakes up. And when she wakes up, she delivers one of the best lines of the book. You'd think watching Beck beat another man and then forking me next to his unconscious body covered in his blood would be the part that rattled me, but it's not. I've never experienced something so hot in my life. And although I hope that's the last time something like that happens, I know I'll revisit it often in my thoughts. Esme, meow if you think that Leona is fucked up. Guys, you heard it here first. Do you have anything else to add? Thank you so much for that. As Leona sends her 3 brain cells into overdrive to think about how she feels, she decides, I'm actually not traumatized by any of the horrific incidents that happened yesterday. I'm traumatized because Beck told me he loved me. She thinks about Lawrence and reflects on her life with him. And apparently she only now realizes that she never really loved him. She says, although I tried to bury the thoughts, I knew I agreed to marry him for the security and comfort he offered. And I'm like, babe, you literally told me that on the 3rd page of this fucking book. Now though, she has another conundrum. She's like, do I actually love Beck, or have I just like transferred my codependence onto Beck? And also, is my relationship with Beck just a great convenient excuse to leave daddy fuck? But she has an epiphany and she says, I do love Beck. I love this sexy, sexy ogre. Now that Leona knows that she does in fact love Beck, she obviously wants to tell him immediately, but he's not home. She doesn't know where he is. So she's like, okay, Beck always cooks for me. I'm going to cook for him and then I'll tell him that I love him when he gets home. So she starts making pancakes and God bless her soul, she burns 2 pancakes and then she gives up. Beck gets home and Leona runs up to him and says, I fucking love ya. And Beck grabs her and throws her on the bed. But unlike defiling her as he usually would, he says the words that I think haunt every girl's nightmares. These are the words you never want to hear. He says, we need to talk. Beck's like, I shouldn't have told you that I love you earlier. And Leona's like, fuck you, because I just told you that I love you. So like, what do you mean? And he says, no, Leona, you can't love me. I captured you. And she says, I know it's a bit unconventional, but I thought about it. I really do love you. I never felt this way with Lawrence. Again, roast. Leona makes it very clear that she doesn't need anything else. She doesn't need this rich LA lifestyle. She doesn't need money, good food. Like she's so happy just living here with him in this swamp. Beck then yells at her. And he says, you can't stay here, Leona. He really goes from 0 to 100, like a lot in this book, but especially right now. Just doesn't feel like the time for yelling. But anyway, she is gooped and gagged, but this time in a really bad way. He then whips out the potion and he says, this bad boy is going to make you forget everything. She then goes, so you lied to me? You said there was no way I could leave. Of course. She says this, so predictable. Beck explains that at first he didn't want to tell her about it because he selfishly just really wanted her to stay. But now that he loves her, he realizes that if you love someone, you have to let them go. You only need the light when it's burning low. Leona can't believe that she's finally found a man who is willing to sacrifice everything for her and they can't be together. And she's like, not on my watch, bitch. Operation Pussy Trap is back, baby. She sees the key to the cage on the counter and she races for it. She goes, grabs the key, runs into the cage and locks herself in it. Leona's like, you can't make me leave. And Beck goes, Leona, you can't stay in the cage forever. Just like you can't stay in this cage of a community forever. Bars. She then begins in the cage where she's locked herself. She begins to sway her hips like the little freak that she is, and she basically resorts to her only party trick, which, as we all know by now, is in fact seduction. It's such a mindfuck at this point as a reader. I mean, the whole book is a mindfuck, like, let's be so for real. But they've basically swapped roles. Like, at the beginning of the book, Leona was like, I need to leave, and Beck was like, you have to stay. And now Leona has locked herself in a cage because she doesn't want to leave, and Beck is angry and because he really wants her to leave. It's just like, it's too much. Anyways, she begins shrekking herself off and says that she won't stop until he says she can stay. And he's like, that's never going to happen, babe. And then she's like, fine. You're just going to have to sit here and watch me then. This is torture for Beck, obviously. So he starts to literally bend the cage doors until he finally gets into the cage and they smash. And at this point, I skipped this scene because if I had to read him call her a bad girl one more time or talk about his seed, I was actually going to pass away. Afterwards, she's like, so does this mean I can stay? Because, you know, that was the whole point of Operation Pussy Trap. And he says no. And she's really pissed and she storms out. Once again, she's stomping through the forest with no direction and she's reflecting on her current situation. She finds the boulder where she first met Beck, which is like the trap that he set. And she starts to wonder, am I just following old patterns? And then she kind of comes to the same conclusion as Beck, that maybe she does actually need to go back to LA, gain her own security and not worry about, you know, these people, like live her own life. As she's thinking this, a voice breaks her from her thoughts. They're shouting, Leona. She's like, who the fuck is that? Like the voice is really far away. But as it comes closer, she is shooketh because guess who it is, baby? It's Mr. Fuck. She's like, what are you doing here? And he's like, what am I doing here? What the fuck are you doing here? I had to track your GPS and you're in the middle of the fucking woods on your bachelorette trip. Like, what is going on? She's like, what took you so long? And he says, babes, you literally wrote a note to these girls saying, do not come and find me. It seems like he genuinely was worried about her. And we can immediately tell that Leona is just like disassociating. She does not care for this man at all. He's like, so are you ready to head back to LA? And she takes a deep breath and she says, yes, I'm ready. So now we go forward a few weeks and she's in LA. Luckily for her, Lawrence has not asked her many questions about her time in the woods, which she's happy about because she's like, how would I tell this guy that someone kidnapped me, that I then like smashed him and also low-key fell in love with him when I'm engaged to you? This part is really just what's going to get ya, because they've actually decided to go ahead with the wedding. Even though she clearly hates him, she has no interest in marrying him. She's kind of like, it's just easier to like let him do everything and I can't be bothered. So I'm just going to go with the flow, which I would say makes you a piece of shit. And honestly, even though Mr. Fuck is like not the best guy in the world, I actually feel really bad for him. I feel like he is a victim of her manipulation and he deserves better. Also, her whole thing about going home was that she needed to find her own security and like find her independence. And yet she's basically just back to where she started living with Lawrence, letting him do everything. So she clearly has no actual goal of improving her life and improving herself, which again, we should have expected that, but I hoped for a character arc here. Leona also tells us that she does in fact cry herself to sleep most nights because she feels like her heart has been split into two pieces, with one part obviously in LA and then a huge part in a swamp in buttfuck nowhere in Florida. Leona is just chilling when she gets a text from Victoria, and Victoria's like, I really miss you, like let's hang out soon. And Leona's actually quite touched by that because despite the fact that they kind of hate each other, she's also like, I should really be a better friend to Victoria. So again, can't make up her mind. But as she's reading Victoria's text, she gets a little hunger pang and she's like, wait a second, I have a brilliant idea. I'm going to go pick up lunch for me and Victoria, and I'm going to go surprise Victoria at her apartment with the food. Luckily, Victoria's front door is unlocked. So Leona just bursts in and she's like, I'm here. I have lunch. Immediately, Victoria screams, and the scream is coming from the bedroom. And Leona's like, oh my gosh, I know, I'm so sorry. I'm the worst. Haha, like didn't knock, hee hee, but come out like I've got lunch. And Victoria eventually emerges from her room in a robe, and she's obviously very pissed, like real pissed. And she's kind of like, oh, Leona, like, I really need you to leave. Leona's like, wait, is someone here with you? And Victoria's like, no, but she says it way too quickly. And Leona's suspicious. But anyway, Victoria is shuffling her out of her apartment when Leona looks towards the front door and she sees a pair of shoes. And she's like, wait a goddamn second. I bought those shoes for Christmas for Lawrence. Leona's like, did Lawrence leave his shoes here? Because that's the only logical explanation. And Victoria's face is like, it says otherwise. And so Leona's like, oh God, I have a bad feeling about this. So Leona pushes past Victoria into the bedroom, and Victoria's like, no, wait. And in Victoria Fuck's bedroom is Lawrence Fuck in his underwear. I'm going to let that sink in for a second, because let me remind you that their last name is both Fuck, and it's not because they're married, it's because they are in fact related. So Leona goes, so you're fucking your sister? She says that to Lawrence. And Leona, as we spoke about in the beginning, she's always had a weird feeling about these two, just because they're like a little too close for comfort, but she never thought it would be anything like this. I'm laughing because I'm so uncomfortable. Like, I hope you guys know. And also this is fiction, so I'm allowed to laugh, but still it's fucking weird. Victoria goes, we're actually half siblings. And Leona's like, oh, well, in that case, how fucking adorable. And then Lawrence goes, Victoria and I aren't in love. We just know each other's bodies better than anyone else. It's purely physical. Are you guys as gagged as I was reading this? Because I went into this book blind. I did not read a trigger warning, like nothing. And I swear to God, I had an out of body experience when I was reading this part. Lawrence is like, Leona, babe, listen, we can still get married. We'll just, do whatever we want with whoever we want on the side. It'll be a marriage of convenience. He also mentions that he knows that Leona was doing something similar with somebody else. And Leona says, I could have forked an entire football team and it wouldn't even hold a candle to the fact that you were having sex with your sister. I would drop this mic if I could, because ate that down. Victoria is sobbing in the bedroom, and Lawrence tells Leona to grow the fuck up. And thank the Lord, Leona finally decides that she's too good for this shit. Okay, she's like, I need to leave. And yes, it took her discovering that her fiance was fucking his sister for her to finally leave. But can we all just agree that we're happy that she's finally out? And also, I redact everything I said about this man. I know I said that I felt sympathy for him. I had to tell you as I was reading, but also trash. Honestly, I don't like a single character except for Godmummy Gilda and Winston LaRue. Anyway, we can all breathe now because that part is over. So now we skip forward 1 month later, and Leona has her own studio apartment above a little shop in Chinatown. It's kind of a shithole, but she's happy that she's out of that relationship. She feels like a weight's been lifted off her shoulders. And what's so convenient for her is because what he did was so terrible, I feel like she now can take zero accountability for all of the horrible things she did during the relationship, and she can just blame him instead and never learn anything. Queen of self-growth. Anyway, her time away from Beck, who is still in his grey sweatpants. I love that. Her time away from Beck has actually made her realize that she did genuinely love him, and not just because it was convenient or because, she didn't want to go back to her regular life. Her feelings are real, but she also thinks that it's too complicated and too impossible to ever work. One thing leads to another. She's thinking about Beck. She's thinking about his Shrek, and she starts shrekking herself off. And then as she's doing that, she hears this big bang on her front door. Bang, bang, bang. She's like, oh my God, there's an intruder. I'm going to die. What does she do? Absolutely nothing. She yells, go away, really quietly, and then does nothing. After a few more bangs on the door, it bursts open. And who is it? It's Beck. he's found her. At this point of a romance novel, you would get a big proclamation of love. He's just burst into her house. Maybe he even is going to propose to her. But this is not a romance novel, is it? This is, in fact, an erotic novel. So he bursts in and he says, I couldn't wait another second for you to open that door. I can smell your arousal, Leona. If I don't have my Shrek buried deep inside you in the next 5 minutes, I think I might die. They smash like they've never smashed before because they're in love with each other, blah, blah, blah. Afterwards, Beck says, why did you leave? At this point, I'm actually so done because these are the most insufferable characters I've ever had to spend time with. He literally forced her to leave. And now he has the audacity to be like, why'd you leave? She says that she really wants to go and live with him in the swamp. And he's like, I still don't think it's going to work. Like, I don't think you're actually going to be happy. And she's like, I'm literally telling you, babe, that I'm going to be happy. Quick pause. Something that we're all wondering, obviously, at this point is how did this 7-foot green ogre get from Florida to LA without being noticed? He says, and this is just iconic, he says he was wearing a hoodie, sunglasses, and a face mask, and then he took a plane. Okay, Taylor Swift. Also, though, the idea that nobody noticed him being bright green, I don't buy it for a second. But anyway, pop off. Leona's upset because Beck still doesn't want her in the swamp. And she's like, I don't know what more I can literally say to you. Like, I want to be there. She's basically doing her own proclamation of love at this point. She's pouring her heart out to him. And this is what he's thinking while she's saying this. My Shrek is pounding, but I fight my sexual urges and try to focus on her words. Oh my God, like neither of them have grown at all. He eventually concedes that she can come back to the swamp, which we're all so happy about at this point because we want this book to be over. But he says he has one condition. Can anyone guess what that condition is? Do you think it's going to be they need to upsize their house? Maybe she needs to, I don't know, make an effort to blend into the magical community? No. She needs to sit on his face. So they get back to the swamp, and apparently Beck, when they first got back there, he made this big proclamation of love in front of everybody in the town and basically said he's going to kill anyone who even looks at her sideways. She feels safe, and she also thinks he's like the sexiest person alive for doing that because everybody's just terrified of him. And she's like, yum. This book would not be Shrek erotica if 3 out of the last 4 pages were not a giant sex scene. We're going to skip past that because we've already established I can't mentally deal with that anymore. But because we've been on this whole journey together, I am going to read the last page with you so that we can really feel like we all get to have a happy ending. Beck sighs and nods as if he understands my silent thoughts. Okay, why don't you take a shower? I'm making waffles. Okay, donkey reference. He hops up from the bed and I stare at his perfect backside. I grab a pillow and press it over my face to suppress my moan. To think, my only discomfort in life is the fact that I have to stop myself from spending all day jumping Beck's bones. Damn, life is good. Life is good. And that, folks, is the end of the book. Can we please get a round of applause up in here? I am exhausted physically from standing, but also mentally from having to process that not once, not twice, but like 10 times. This script and video and book, everything took me so long. So if you enjoyed it, please give it a like. Leave me a comment, and also please subscribe because I would love to do more of these videos. There's so much traumatizing fan fiction out there. So let me know if there's anything you want me to cover down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'm deeply sorry for all of the trauma that this has no doubt given you, but at least we're in it together. I'll see you guys next week with a new video. Bye.